Hi everybody, my name's Elaine and today I'm going to be demonstrating how to colour grayscale using this design by Alchemy Carta from the amazing new issue of Colouring Heaven, issue 99, Gothic Beauties special. If you enjoy this tutorial and you'd like to colour along, then you can buy your own copy by going to shop.coloringheaven.com. That link will be in the description below. So let's get started. It can be fairly hard to figure out where to start when you're doing a grayscale page because it can be very intimidating, I know, but I'm just going to approach this the same way as I would any normal line art drawing and just start the way I normally would. So I like to start with the skin, so I'll be starting with her skin by giving her a very light coat of this Tangerine 020 GP, and I am using Castle Art Gold pencils for this, and I'm just going to start by giving her a very light layer of this over her skin just to give me a base colour for her skin, because what I like to do is once I've finished putting all my skin layers on is to go over with the white pencil to blend, and if you've got a really light base layer of your really light colour then that helps with the blending, or I found anyways. So I'm just going to go over all these kind of shaded areas on her face. I want to leave these lighter areas where the sunlight would be hitting her face and trying to avoid those as much as possible, just blending out around the edges and just filling in these parts where the shadows would be. And having grayscale underneath, that's taken all the guesswork out of that for me, so I'm just going to follow where the actual shading is on the page and add in my very first layer of a skin colour. Moving down, and I'm going to concentrate on just this main area here today so I can show you how I would cope with each element of the actual figure and how different colours and stuff would affect how you use your pencils, which it doesn't very much actually. But moving down her body into this arm that's in the shade, and if your area on a page has the darker grayscale, you can apply a little more pressure, press a little bit harder. Again, leaving the highlight onto her arm. This arm and hand, as she's playing her violin, this arm and her hand is raised up, again more towards the sun, so the sunlight would be hitting it there on the top of her arm. So I'm going to try and leave that highlight there and just add a bit more of this base skin colour down her fingers. And underneath her arm would be a bit more of a shadowed area, as her arm would be casting that shadow from the light. Just keeping the layers fairly light, because just lots of light layers is what I found to be best when colouring grayscale. And the second colour that I'll be using for her skin will be this light peach, and that is 188 GP. I'm using this just to deepen the shadows a little bit in these more shadow areas. Again, just letting the grayscale show you where the darkest shadows are, trying to blend out into that lighter colour and letting the white highlights on her face shine out. So her face will be looking up into the sun, so it's kind of the most well lit piece. You want to try and make these shadows fairly dramatic. It would be fairly shadowed here underneath where her violin is. Down her arm, which is turned away from the sun, will give her another layer of the skin tone, deepening these shadows a little bit. Onto this hand here, and what I would like to do is try and leave a very, very small little highlighted area to differentiate between these two different areas of skin. Very small highlighted area along the bottom of her hand. We'll emphasise that a little bit later when we go in with our darker layers of skin tones, just to show that this hand is kind of further towards us and is up into the sun, has the light on it, so the shadows would be deeper there. Of course, you can always go back to your areas if you feel like you haven't applied enough layers or enough pressure. You can go back anytime, just like with any normal colouring. What I'll do before I add any further shadows on her face is just to add a little bit of pink. This will be the Coral Deep, which is 175 GP, and give her a little bit of a blush happening on her cheeks. A little bit of pink in the cheeks, just to bring a little bit of life to her face. And for the lighter areas, to emphasize the sun that's hitting her face, I've used Naples Yellow Light just around the edges where we went in with our flesh tone. A little bit of this Naples Yellow to show that the sunlight is hitting her face there, coming into her cheekbones, and any bits of her face that might be up towards the light, maybe her chin there. And the next layer of shade for her skin, I will be using Cinnamon, which is 012 GP, just very lightly, to add a little bit more of a warmer brown tone into her skin, which will help to look good with the violin, because once we do the violin, which will be really warm, kind of wooden tones, that should all look good together. I'm just going through these shadowy areas, just again using the grayscale, show me where the shadows would go. Just helps you out a lot, I think, when it comes to knowing where to put your shadows. Worrying about if you put your shadows in the right place, because they're all there for you and you just have to work with them, let the grayscale do most of the work, and you're good to go. And to take the shadows even deeper on her face, I have Warm Grey, that's 161 GP. Deepen these shadows even more, especially around here where the violin is. So her face would actually be going behind the violin as she plays it, so shadows there would be pretty deep. And here, underneath where the violin goes over her skin, we can add more layers to the shadow. And we can always come back, once we've done a few more areas, we can always come back if we think that, oh, I've done that violin now and that colour's looking a bit too strong, the skin is a bit too pale. We can go back anytime. I was just adding some more warm grey there in that arm that's facing away from the sun, so that would be in the shadow there. Just emphasising what's already there, really. As I've said, what I like to do with skin is to blend it with the white. So this is Titanium White 072, and I would just use that to make all these colours a little bit smoother. Also blending in that yellow that I put around the edges, making that look like a natural part of his skin, I think. I did actually look up the original colours for this painting because I was really unfamiliar with it. I hadn't seen it before, and I looked it up, and the colours are, considering it's a really kind of gothic looking image with this gothic lady on a rooftop with her corset and gothic costume, the colours are really soft and gentle. I'm just going to go in with this walnut brown there, a little bit more shadow on her face. Yeah, the colours are really soft and gentle, so I thought, yeah, that works so well because it's such a contrast between the imagery and the actual colours. So I'm going to try and use the same kind of colour palette that was in the original painting or artwork. I'm going to try and use the same original colours and hopefully get the same kind of effect with the really gothic imagery with the really soft colours, almost pastel-y, I think. So it probably won't be exactly the same, but using it as inspiration. Shadow on her fingers, and under here where her hand goes across the chest, I'll add a little bit more shadow there. Emphasize this kind of highlighted area at the bottom of her hand, because as this hand is more towards us, more towards the sun, the shadows would be a lot more pronounced. So I'll just try and do cinnamon, maybe a little bit of the cinnamon on there, especially down here where her fingers curve downwards, so we'll be going away from the light. There we go. And what I like to do as well is to add in, bring in a little bit of the pink into her fingers. This is the Coral Deep, the same colour we used for her blushy cheeks. I'll add a little bit of that onto her fingers and blend that out with the white. So let's give her a little bit of lipstick there. And what I would use for that, this is the Walnut Brown 121 again. And again, this will show you where the darker lines would be. So I'm just going over the inside line of her top lip there. Emphasising her bottom lip, maybe adding a little bit of a shadow underneath. Curve that into her chin. And her lipstick, I'm using the Azalea Pink, which is 082. Her outfit, her corset, as I've said, the original art is absolutely stunning. It is beautiful, and it uses a nice, really pale kind of baby pink for her corset, which works super well with the soft tones of her skin. And her hair is really dark. Her hair is black, almost blue. So yeah, I'm hoping I can make mine work just as well. For her eyes, I'm going to give her brown eyes. So that would be with, this is Redwood 197 GP, and just add a very tiny bit of that brown into her eyes there. There we go, just for a touch of colour. And because she's a gothic lady, why not give her some eyeliner or mascara? This is the Ivory Black. Really make those eyes stand out. And I'm just going to shade the inside her eyes with the Dove Grey. That helps to make her eyes look a bit more realistic, three-dimensional. Give a little bit of shadow under her top eyelid there. And as I've said, her hair is really dark black. So how I would usually approach that, if I was just colouring a line art drawing, I would use as my undertone, I would use a blue. So I find it helps if hair is really dark and the sun does shine onto it, causing highlights, it tends to look really blue under the sunlight. So I'm going to use this as my base. This is Cobalt Blue Deep 095, and I'm going to use that as my base, and not forget her eyebrows. And once the violin is done, which is going to be really warm orangey tones of wood, yeah, it will look really nice against the blue, because blue is the opposite colour to orange on the colour wheel, so that should concentrate really well. It's so obvious that it would draw attention to her face. And the sun is coming from this corner over here down onto her hair, so this bit would be fairly light. I'm going to try and leave that fairly light. And just give some blue undertones for where our main shading will be. And the main shading will be with the black, just to make her hair really dark, super gothic. Main bulk of the blue there. Again, we can always go back, add some more if we're not sure it's looking good enough. Trying to keep the rest of the colours really pale so it will contrast with this dark shading we've got going on here. I'm trying to keep the shading around this violin looking pretty dark, because we want the violin to be coming forwards towards the viewer, towards us. So we're going to deepen the shadows around there. And once we've done the violin, we can come back and adjust it. I do tend to do that a lot with my colouring. I will come back, work on layers until I'm happy, until I'm satisfied with how the colours are all working together. Blending on her hair, I'm using the Dove Grey, which is the same colour that I did for her eyes, and I'm just using this to, along the edges of the highlights, maybe blend in that blue very slightly. Trying to leave the highlights that are given to us, trying to leave those pretty white, so that we've got the contrast between the black and the white, which would also be really good for drawing attention to her face. Layering is the name of the game with Greyscale, so don't be afraid. As many layers as the paper will take. And not really any reason to be afraid of making mistakes, because the shading it's all there for you. Just follow what's there, and we're bound to get a really nice solid 3D look going on, because everything's already worked out for you. You've only got to apply the colour, which is one of the beauties of Greyscale. It just takes a lot of guesswork out of it. even for something as hard to colour as a face, something that complicated, it just makes it so easy because all the shadows are there for you already. And it gives you good practice learning where they actually go. And as the shadows are pretty dark on this side, we can apply more pressure, make our colours darker. And there we go, her hair is really coming to life now. Just using this grey to maybe blend the blue and the black a tiny bit and soften the highlights, especially under here. There wouldn't be any light here, so this is the basic kind of areas of shade, light and shade that I'm going to be going for, so that will give me more of an indication how deep my shadows really need to be there. Yeah, okay, for now she's looking pretty good, so I move on to her bodice now. And as I've said, in the actual original artwork, her bodice is a really lovely shade of kind of pastel-y baby pink, so I thought we could maybe use the pale pink and work into that a little bit. And start off here with, this is Pink Bloom 186 GP, and start off with our really light colour. Because this is really light grayscale, so we can work in with the light colours and still get pretty strong colour. And we're just following the lines that are already here for us here, or the shadows, because this corset is made of like a satiny sort of material, which is reflecting the light. So these kind of lines and wrinkles, all part and parcel of having really gorgeous satin bodice. Actually, I really do. I love the Gothic style. That's probably why this issue will probably be one of my favourites, I think. This side here, we're going away from the light again, so here where her body is bending, that would be shadow there. And it's the main part of the bodice. Again, following just the shadows and lights up there, giving this really nice effect of the wrinkling satin fabric just moving with her body and creating these gorgeous folds and wrinkles so we can highlight with our shading. The next shade I picked for using on her bodice, a little bit of shading, is this one, Sepia Light, which has a lovely kind of purpley tone to it. That's another good thing. Once the grayscale was this light, you can go over the lines and make them a colour. They're not just solid black, you can go in and just go over the lines. Like I've made that line more of a sepia purple colour now. And again, where the shadows are deeper, we can go in another layer. Maybe a little bit harder pressure. We're trying to leave these highlights as light as we can because satin is very shiny. If a fabric is shiny, the highlights are going to be more brighter white rather than a pale shade of the colour. And for our last layer of shading on her bodice, I've chosen the Aubergine. This is 028. This is a really nice purple colour. And for the darkest shadows, we can use this. And as I've said, because these lines are really light grayscale and pretty faint, we can actually go over them. So I thought we could give her some really nice embroidery onto this corset. Purple embroidery. I do love purple. And it goes so well with the Gothic style. So we'll give her this lovely purple rose on her bodice. By just going over these lines. Lovely, and we can add a few little shadows as well. Pressing pretty lightly because we don't want to overwhelm that embroidery we're just giving her on her beautiful corset. Back to the sepia. And a little bit of the pink bloom. A little bit of a pink bloom just to finish off those little ruffles down the side there. And now these have been outlined, we can add our pink to these ruffles down the seams. There we go, good. And for these ribbony bows around the edges, I thought I'd make those a darker purple colour, so I'm going in with the Aubergine. And around the edges, the parts where it's darker, we're going to leave the highlights to go over with the sepia. And just to emphasise the shadows on those, a little tiny touch of the Ivory Black, just the bits where the ribbons cross, just to add a bit of three-dimensional kind of shadow going on there. Okay, a bit of shadow there, where it goes behind her hand, where it goes behind her arm. There we go. That's looking good. And this bow in the middle of her corset here in the original art, that is just a slightly different shade of pink than the rest of her bodice. So I'm going in with Grenadine with 080 GP, giving a little bit of a different, more salmony shade of pink. Leaving the highlight areas, because again it would be made of the satiny, kind of satiny fabric, so leaving the highlights, giving it a pretty deep colour, just so it looks different to the rest of her bodice. Like that. Forgot the centre. And again using the Aubergine for our shading, giving it pretty deep shadows to look fairly shiny. We can add a bit of outlining. Okay, and because that bow would be standing out quite far from her bodice, we want to make that look as if it's coming towards us a little bit more. I'm going to add some more shadows with the Cool Grey Deep, and just add, especially around this side where the sun would be casting the shadow as this part is away from the light. I'm going to add some more deeper shadows around this bow. There you go, that's looking good. And you can always, if you feel an area isn't standing out enough, you've gone over a highlight, or you just want to bring something forward a little bit more, you can go in with the white gel pen. This is Renewable Signal, and I'm just going to emphasise the edge of that ribbon there. For now, that's looking good, so might be time to move on. Can always come back and emphasize shadows and stuff like that once we've got all our main areas done, if that's what we want to do. So I'm going to move on to a violin now. On the first base layer for a violin, I'm going to use a yellow ochre, which is 077, and just give a really light, pretty much all over, a very light layer of the yellow ochre. And for this area of the violin, as the veneer or the wood grain would be going more of an up and down kind of way, I'll keep my strokes of the pencil going that way so it follows the wood grain. And on the top of the violin, the wood grain would be going in this kind of direction, so we can have our strokes going the same kind of way, just to try and emphasize that wood grain kind of texture. But again, the grayscale is already there, showing you the way to go, so just follow what's there. You can't really go wrong. Just around that part. Make sure we do that part behind the strings. The next layer is cinnamon, the same colour that we've used for our skin, so bring in a bit of that. Again, following where the shadows are telling you where to go. In the middle of these curves. And building up the light layers, because we want this to be really rich, orangey, dark wood, so we're going to build up our layers to give a really rich colour. This kind of golden brown, orangey violin. Again, layers is how you work with grayscale, really. Just keep adding more until you're happy. The next colour would be brown ochre. I would use with this wood. I'm trying to keep a tiny little highlight there to show the edge of the violin, between the violin and her hair. Trying to keep a tiny little highlight. Just going in with our next layer of shadows. But here we are. This is Redwood 197. This is more of an orangey colour. Just adding a layer of that. Then you press your tail off when it comes to the more highlighted areas, but in the darker areas you can give it a bit more pressure, press a bit harder. And now going in with some Van Dyke brown. This is a fairly dark kind of brown, so I think we can start going along the bottom edge of this edging here, just to give a bit of shadow. Back in with yellow ochre, and this time pressing really quite hard, giving a fair amount of pressure. We're trying to blend these colours together. Seeing as yellow ochre is the lightest colour that we are using on this violin, I'm trying to blend them all together slightly, but still keep this wood grain effect happening there. Choosing the yellow ochre for your highlight, and on these edges using the yellow ochre maybe as a highlight, blending them all together. We can go back in with our darker shades to really make this rich wood. This is the Van Dyke brown again. Not being too worried about the strokes showing through because it is wood grain, and that really helps with the wood grain to have the pencil strokes. Same on the top. Tilt this paper slightly so that I can see where my wood grain would be going, and I'll go in. This is the Redwood, aiming for those rich orangey tones from the original artwork, the beautiful original artwork. This is the cinnamon, and that's a more orangey kind of tone to really build up the shiny rich wood. Maybe to emphasize the shiny rich wood, we might be able to go a little tiny bit of the titanium white. To do this curlicue on the violin, this really deep kind of hole through that, I'm using the cool grey deep to contrast with the warm colour of the wood. That cool grey deep really emphasises that. For our edging, we could also add a little bit of the cool grey deep, just for the shadow underneath this top edging and under the bottom. Okay, well, start to fill that in with the yellow ochre, because this part would be fairly light. It's more towards the sun, standing up from the edge of the violin, so yellow ochre. And this little bit in the middle, that's usually a kind of light, very light wood colour, so I'll add a little bit of the redwood and blend that out with the white. This part here is black from what I've managed to find out, so we're going with the cool grey. And that's getting lost a little bit into the shadows there behind her chin, so I'm going to grab our walnut brown, do maybe a little bit of outline, emphasise that shadow. We could always add a very tiny touch of cool grey. Okay, and now most of our areas are done. We can go back in and work on anything that might need a bit more bit more depth of colour, and I think maybe her cheek there. So her skin is pressing in slightly there. We'll add a little bit of shadow. And the warm grey. Okay, might work into shadows here a little bit as well. This is the Walnut Brown again, underneath where the violin is resting on her shoulder there. And let's give her hand a little bit more definition as well, again with the Walnut Brown. Just building up any shadows that might need touching up. Just adding any little finishing touches now. I always seem to miss at least one little bit, so I have to go back. Every time I colour a picture, I have to go back, find all the bits that I missed. A bit more cinnamon on your face here, I think. But maybe a little bit more shadow on her nose, I'm thinking. Light peach. This is a little bit more warm grey. Just blending out this shadow underneath the violin and adding a bit more here under her hand. Even going over the bodice there, just to show her hand is away from her body as she's playing her violin. Yeah, I think that looks really good. I'm really happy with that. I'm just going to add a little bit more warm grey on these fingers where they're coming down away from the light. Okay, and just to finish things off on this little part, I will add a little bit more of the white gel pen, just on some areas where the sun would be shining, little bits of shiny wood along the edge of the violin here maybe. Add a bit more detail onto her bodice, just these little bits of lace. Maybe as a very last touch, a little bit of sepia light onto her lips there. There we go, I'm going to call her done now. I'm pretty happy with how she's turned out. That's how I would approach doing grayscale. Of course, you can go back into that, add more layers if you're not happy with anything. If you feel her face needs more working, just go back in, add more shadows. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with how she's turned out for now. We'd love to see your grayscale colouring in the Friends of Colouring Heaven Facebook group. Please like, subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss out on future Colouring Heaven videos. If you've enjoyed this tutorial and this design, don't forget you can order your own copy of Colouring Heaven issue 99, Gothic Beauty Special, from the online shop. Just go to shop.colouringheaven.com or click the link in the description. Take care everyone. Bye.